If you're up to date with my channel, you've probably seen my Mega IPVO or Intermediate Powered Variable Optic comparison video. In that video, I took optics that had a minimum magnification of 1.1 to 2.5x and a maximum magnification above 10x. I only had about 7 or so that I had on hand to actually test, but there was a lot that I had tested previously and a lot on the market that I have yet to even get my hands on. This was one such product. This is the Maven RS1.2, and it received more comments and questions from viewers such as yourself on that video and on PMs and DMs on all the other subs and forums that I'm on. And a lot of people had a lot of things to ask about this scope. So I figured, why not reach out to my friends over at Maven and see if they were willing to send this in for me to review. And they were more than happy to oblige. So yes, full transparency, Maven did send this in for me to review. However, that is not going to skew my review on this, my findings, or my opinions, because your opinion about me matters more than anything else. You can find these for around the $1,200-ish price point. They are as simple as a box as you can get. In fact, they remind me very much so of the original SWFA products. Maven's cost cutting and giving you the best possible deal on their product is so extreme that they don't even offer a paper manual. Instead, they give you a QR code that you have to scan to read the manual. From there, we have a egg carton looking box with 2 little buttons that you push and it opens up like so. Inside, we do have a neoprene cover for the scope, which does look and feel really, really nice. It's got a lot of stretch to it, and it's very nice and soft on the inside. The only other thing to remove is the optic itself and an Allen key that is perched just underneath it. This is not the RS1.2, this is the RF.1, or their 7x25 laser rangefinder. I have been using this thing since I got it and reviewed it, and I absolutely love this thing. It has been nothing short of fantastic. This is made in the Philippines. And if you're curious about where some of their optics are made, these are made in Japan. So you spend $1,200 for the optic by itself, or $1,300 as a kit. What comes inside that kit, you might be asking? Well, a set of worn Mountain Tech rings and AAD mount rifle scope caps. I had these on my USO and they were fantastic. As far as the worn Mountain Tech scope rings, these things have a very good reputation online. Let's get right into it, shall we? And the first thing we're going to take a look at is the weight. On my scale, naked, it comes in at 26.6 ounces, which is not terrible. Let's pull out a couple of different comparison scopes to see how much that's going to actually live for us. If we were to factor in the weight of an AAD Recon, they're about 7 ounces. So when I throw this Night Pearl second focal plane 2.5 to 15 by 50 in the second focal plane on, we deduct 7 ounces from that. And these two scopes are very close to one another as far as weight goes. The Meopta Optica 6.3 to 18 by 50 in a GG&G mount is a little bit heavier, but this also has a few more features as well as more magnification. I think these two are going to be getting put head to head during the comparison segment of this video, but until that time, let's focus strictly on the Maven. Starting at the back, we have a fast focus eyepiece, which is perfectly in line with the outside tube. Very good resistance on this, good solid feel, absolutely zero wiggle to that eyepiece. Absolutely silent. We do have a little indicator on there for your 0, minus, or plus, but this sounds, feels fantastic. There is no aggressive knurling or rubber on this, so I'm not worried about this thing getting bumped out of your perfect setting. And again, this thing requires a lot of effort to turn. So far, this eyepiece feels fantastic. On to the magnification ring, we have the minimum of 2.5 at 9 o'clock and the maximum of 15 at 3 o'clock, so 180-degree sweep. And with this, the numbers don't move, the actual indicator moves, which I kind of like that. Because if you have it like there, and you're behind the gun, and you go, oh, okay, I know where my magnification is roughly, and you can just dial it up accordingly. I still think that something like what Meopta does with the Optica 6 is a little bit better, where the actual ring itself has a lip, and the numbers are on that lip, so you know exactly what magnification you're on. However, it's not a deal breaker for me in the slightest. The knurling on this magnification ring is absolutely perfect. Look at that. Look at how sharp that is. It's got such a nice edge to it. It's got such a good purchase point to it. It feels wonderful. I don't even think you need a throw lever for this scope. It sounds like nothing, super smooth, no soft or hard spots, very consistent and even. And I have to say, I love it so far. I do wish that they offered a slightly higher ramp. Maybe they do, and I just missed it. But I'd love to see this be brought up like an extra 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch, and that would be a perfect combination. As far as the actual fit and finish of everything, the anodizing looks extremely even on this. You can get this in different colors. You could also get this front ring engraved with your name or whatever you want on it, which is really, really cool. Not a lot of companies offer that, especially for the price point. On to the side controls, we have illumination and our side focus. We're going to start with the illumination ring, which does have a very good solid feel and lockup. D10's pretty deep, pretty sharp, not the sharpest, but you know exactly when you're making an adjustment, which I can't really complain about. One thing I can complain about is that the battery cap is the exact same as the dial itself. So you got to get over here and try to pinch this like that and come over here and try to turn it. And it's really a pain in the butt. If you also, and as a result of it being a pain in the butt, you might not be able to torque it down as much as you would like. And if you come over here and constantly adjust this thing counterclockwise, it will eventually unscrew. Under the cap, we have a nice large spring and a nice large O-ring. Inside, we have a standard CR2032 battery and a very nice looking battery compartment. These are found on the higher end scopes, this being one of them. It just doesn't cost higher end money. Around $1,200, you could still find a lot of scopes that offer the 3-dimple board and the 6-finger leaf spring on top. But with this, that is not the case. That up is not terrible, but I would still prefer full-sized with a recessed cap, but then you'd have to worry about having this setup be a lot larger and thus heavier. As far as the side parallax, you can see it goes down to 10-ish yards and goes all the way around to infinity, just shy of 270 degrees. A little bit of a sound inside, probably the seal or the anodizing rubbing, but very smooth. And again, just like with the magnification ring, a very healthy amount of damping. It requires quite a lot of effort to turn this. It feels like it's just going to stay exactly where you put it. That is something I am very happy of. However, what I'm not the happiest with is the overall finish on this. I guess they chose to do this so this way it's not too aggressive like the other controls. So this way they don't accidentally get bumped and turned on and kill your battery, or bumped and then change your parallax setting. But I would love to see the knurling on these two touch points as well, just because the knurling is so good. And you can see they already have it on the windage and elevation, so why not just continue on the parallax and the illumination? As for our elevation turret, this is non-locking. So if that's going to be a deal breaker for you in a scope like this, just shut off the video and go watch one of my other videos that features a turret that locks. Instead, they only offer a 0 stop, which is better than nothing. But I would like I love the combination of locking and 0 stop, especially in the scope of this package, where with this magnification range and the reticle set that comes inside these scopes, this could really be a wonderful crossover scope. Part hunting, part tactical, and everything in between. So having a locking turret would really bring that and elevate it to the next level. We have rotational indicator underneath, but it's very easy to turn. So I'd be very worried about this getting bumped and rotating out, especially with the aggressive knurling. Again, pros and cons. But it just doesn't fill me full of absolute confidence that this is going to stay exactly where I want it all of the time. Very easy to turn this. It's much harder to turn the magnification ring, the illumination, and the side parallax, the elevation on this thing. Very easy to turn. It does sound and feel very good. You can see there's a little bit of play inside the detent, but we'll be taking a much closer look at that momentarily. Now, for many of you, you might look at this cap and go, how do you unlock the cap to adjust your 0 stop or your 0? Well, Maven does something really slick. where they integrate the cap and the turret like so, and they splice together that knurling flawlessly. Underneath it, there is your zero stop. We have this large ring with 3 set screws in it. It does look like it's hard. It hits on these hard pins as your stop, and it looks pretty good and pretty easy to set. All you have to do is loosen up the set screws, put it down, clock it all the way to the right or clockwise, have the pins line up on this side, and then tighten it up and you're good to go. Very nice large threads on the cap and nice big old fat O-ring right here. So very nice clean setup. And I love that it's hidden like this. I'm not worried so much about this getting loosened up over time because thankfully that knurling is so aggressive that you can really get a good purchase on that and clamp it down. And that's part of the reason why I'd love to see it on these 2 controls as well. As far as our windage turret, Maven was very smart in at least capping this. Removing the cap yields a wonderful looking turret underneath it that features the exact same knurling, and you can see the split ring right there, the exact same style setup as we saw with the elevation turret. Do you want to know something that's really funny? This turret is much harder to turn than the elevation. I'm sure the diameter has something to do with that, but it sounds and feels better than the elevation. Listen. I actually prefer how the windage sounds and feels as opposed to the elevation on the scope. Again, if you want to reset this, loosen this up, pull it off, adjust it, put it back. I'm not going to bother doing that right now, but just know that that is how you do it. So far, this scope seems to have a lot of good features, a lot of stuff that I like. I like that it's Japanese made. I like that it hits a pretty mediocre price point, $1,200. It's a lot, but it's not that much where you're scratching your head going, why does it cost so much? And I do like a lot of what is going on with the scope, but I would like to see a couple of changes that I've already gone way too in depth with. But anyway, let's move on to see if this thing performs optically better than how some of these controls are set up. For many people, this turret will be perfectly fine. For me, I think it's way too easy to turn, and it doesn't have the same sort of bite that I would hope that a non-locking turret has. Unfortunately, I think this could be improved. One area that I feel Maven did an excellent job with is with the reticles. This is the SHR in mils. They also offer it in MOA, as well as another MOA 2 option, which are all slightly different. I also really like that Maven shows what all the reticles are going to look like at their minimum and maximum magnifications. Now, the MOA ones are a little bit too extreme on one way or the other. I feel that the SHR mil reticle as seen here and seen in this scope is the best of both worlds. You have a great thick center section that allows your eye to pick it up very quickly, as well as those posts at 3, 6, 9, and 12. But at the very center, you have a fine center aiming point and a small milling reticle around it, so you could use this in a multitude of different ways, whether you want to dial for elevation or hold for your dope. Increasing the magnification to its maximum, you'll see that this reticle is very easy to understand. Everything is clearly labeled, everything is right there in your face, and that center dot, though the illumination on this doesn't seem that great, you probably won't need it with just how good the scaling is on it. Unfortunately, though, while we're on the topic of the illumination, it is definitely on the weaker side. I think it could definitely be improved. but I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. There are a couple of other scopes that I tested in the same time frame as this, which don't have illumination, and I really, really, really wish that it did. So despite the fact that the illumination isn't that bright on this thing, at least it has it. No one wants a scope that can't track. The illumination down here is, again, very hard to see. The reticle does not shift on the target when we change magnification or the parallax setting. As far as how the reticle lines up to my target, as you can very clearly see, perfect. I did notice, with my extensive use of the scope, that the side parallax felt very touchy, as if you're going to make a slight adjustment and it moves it a lot more than what it seems like it should be in your head. As far as our little mini step test, it passes with flying colors and gives us a very good performance at 4 mils up and 4 mils over. Continuing up to 9 full mils, we basically hit it bang on perfect, though the dot does look like it might be favoring the right-hand side of the line ever so slightly, but that could have been a minor imperfection in my ability to clock that properly. Either which way, it was less than 1/10 of a mil, which is, well, pretty damn impressive. As far as slop to either turret, there was none, and as far as it resetting to 0, it was perfectly fine. This was a very good performance. Don't worry, I'm not pointing a rifle at these deer, but if I were, I would have had a lot of venison that day. My backyard is usually littered with deer. This day was no exception during a very heavy snowstorm that we had a couple months ago, but I had the perfect opportunity to test this reticle out in what I feel its perfect case use point is: hunting/lightweight tactical, and focusing on this buck that's about 30 or so yards away. Whether you're at minimum or maximum magnification, it is very easy to pick up. Illumination is on full, and you can just pick it up on that fur. Despite the conditions being as poor as they are, the center illumination is still just noticeable. So in a situation like this, it's about as bright as you might ever need it. However, if you want it to go a little bit brighter, that's not going to be the case. Stepping down the shutter speed on the camera a little bit to get a less washed out image shows it even better. It's quite wonderful. And whether you're at maximum magnification like we just were, or around 10x, it's, I feel, a very nice looking, simple, easy to pick up and easy to use reticle. If you couldn't guess by now, I really, really like it. When you're gifted an opportunity like this that doesn't come along all that often, you should do as much as possible, and that's exactly what I did. I took out my Vector Continental 2-12 to see how it would compare side by side against the Maven. This scope is definitely set up a little bit more on the precision-ish side of things, especially with how the reticle is laid out. However, the illumination is much, much brighter and very easy to spot, whether you're at the minimum or the maximum magnification. And it works just as well as the Maven in this sort of role. I was quite pleased with how well this reticle functioned in this environment on these deers. So just to already signify that there's going to be a lot of good comparisons against this Maven, this Vector Continental is certainly one of them. And what are you really giving up? You're giving up a little bit of magnification up top, and you're actually gaining half a point down low, and you're getting, as far as I'm concerned, much better illumination, a more versatile reticle, but again, that's a very personal thing. And you're also saving a fair amount of money. A couple $100 is nothing to scoff at. With the snow finally melted, it's now time to see how well this reticle is going to function against this very dense, dry brush area. At minimum magnification, again, I feel the reticle is wonderfully scaled, whether we're focusing on my soon-to-be precision targets or we're panning across the woods. Illumination on full really does not do anything. Lighting conditions were pretty good, overcast, but more or less kind of partly sunny. You could tell the light was very evenly diffused, so it didn't really create any sort of dark areas. Panning across this wasteland of a backyard that I have at 2.5x, I think this reticle serves its purpose very well. Cropping the image and relocating our attention onto my slightly more precise targets, we will see what sort of optical clarity we can achieve with this rifle scope. I wanted to spruce up the backyard targets and really have a better fundamental test of how to test all these optics and see what their clarity, sharpness, and resolution are. I was scratching my head for a while, And then one day I had an epiphany. Why not get an eye exam chart? And that's exactly what I did. I also got a color reference board on the top right and my tracking paper target on the bottom right. These are all laminated and stapled to that board, and that board is screwed into the tree. You could see that adjusting the side parallax, it's really kind of hard to get the exact spot to make everything as beautiful as possible. And it wasn't just at 81 yards at this target. It was at closer distances. It was at farther distances. It's all over the place. I think part of it has to do with just how hard it is to turn, but it's also still very touchy. You make a minor adjustment and it seems like it goes completely out of whack. Using the eye exam chart, though, we can see that line number 8 is about as good as we're going to be able to see confidently. You could make out a couple of the letters on line number 9, but to my eye at least, it's a little bit too hard. I want to be able to definitively tell every letter apart, and for me, that's going to be line number 8. As far as the rest of the image, it does look pretty good. Contrast on the scope is all right, but I do notice a little bit of purple chromatic aberration coming up on the high contrast areas. You could especially see it on the number 1 line on the eye exam chart, which is E. You could see it just got a little bit of a purple tint to it. Not the end of the world, definitely something that you're not going to be overblown with and just have it be annoying, but it's something to take note of. Several days before I put up the new targets, I did my low light testing. It's very clearly late evening. I think it was like around 5 p.m. or so when I filmed this. And you can see ambient light, looking just through the camera, is pretty good. We can easily make out the target on the tree and some of the larger tree branches in the woods. Coming up behind the scope, it looks pretty close to what we saw with the naked eye. Illumination at this point is good on the center, but you can see on the very outside edge, you do get this ghosting effect. And it's apparent throughout most of the illumination range, at least when you're at the minimum magnification. When you increase it above 5x, it goes away because you're looking past it, but it's going to be something that you are going to notice. Again, when I mentioned that the illumination on this thing could be improved, that's another thing that I was talking about other than just the brightness. Taking the scope up to its maximum magnification, though, I didn't notice a real loss of brightness looking through it. However, because your iris is going to get larger in lower light environments, the exit pupil that Maven claims is 2.9 millimeters at the maximum magnification might be smaller than what your iris is, and thus you're going to have these weird shadows when you're trying to look through it. There's nothing wrong with the scope, it's just the maximum capacity that it has in lower light environments. Illumination in these conditions, I would say, is very important. Despite how good the reticle is to pick up to the naked eye, if it's a later in the day or even early morning shot that you have to make on a buck or whatever other game that you're hunting out in the woods, illumination will give you that extra little bit of confidence that you know exactly where dead center is. Again, as long as your zero is going to be good. Overall, this scope performs in these conditions, I feel quite good, with the exception of the illumination bleeding out as much as it does. I really wish it didn't do that. One last pass of this reticle across some barren wastelands. We are going to just see how well it looks in this environment, which is much brighter with much taller grass. Illumination on full is not going to be visible in these conditions. It was, as you can clearly tell, a picturesque, perfect day, which is why I finally made the trudge through the icy path to go to these power lines. Reticle, need I say more? I think it's absolutely superb while still allowing for a good amount of precision at the higher end. Good job, Maven. I really do like this reticle. Focusing on our power towers, I've been mislabeling the distances on these solar panels. The first one's like around 360-ish yards, the middle one's like mid-500s, and the far one is exactly 1,000. At this 300-ish plus yard target, you can see the chromatic aberration that I was talking about earlier. I've always found across every scope that I've tested that chromatic aberration is much more apparent when you have a much brighter subject down range. In this case, it being a very clear skied, very bright sun day, the chromatic aberration is going to be much more apparent than what we saw earlier in my backyard. Again, it's not obtrusive, but it's something that you are going to notice. As far as image sharpness clarity,
Everything here looks really good. I can't complain about it at all, especially the given distance. I'm no hunter, but I'd reckon that 360-ish yards is pushing it for a lot of people's capacities in the field on certain game. Nevertheless, pulling it back to 10x, we're going to focus on our 1,000-yard solar panel and see just how capable this thing is at extreme distances. Despite how cold it was that day, the sun was very warm, and thus we're going to have a lot of mirage. You could already see it boiling up through the image. And taking it up to its maximum again at 1,000 yards, I can't fault this image at all. Depth of field at this distance is exceptionally good. I like a large depth of field in a practical style rifle scope. This is what I'd consider a practical style rifle scope. All of the towers that we see in frame at 3 o'clock around 500 yards, the middle at 1,000, and the one to the far left probably like around 1,500 yards. Everything is sharp, clear, and in focus. And I didn't have to adjust the side parallax all that much from 360-ish yards out to 1,000, which for me is a win. The less I have to adjust on a practical style scope, the better. Increasing 10 full mils of elevation and focusing back on center, you can see that we had no shift to the exit pupil or the eyebox on this scope when dialing for elevation. I do, however, try to make the image a little bit sharper by adjusting the side parallax, but unfortunately there was a rogue cloud that came through, so I had to pause the video for a second. Getting back to it, the image looks like it might have gotten a little bit softer on the inside, but not to the point where it would be a completely unusable image. Just checking to make sure that everything is still centered perfectly, you can very clearly tell that the shadows do creep in, but they are fairly progressive. Bringing it back to 0 mils of added elevation and requiring that solar panel for one last go of it, you can see that there's definitely a little bit more sharpness when you're not dialing for elevation, but if you do dial up that much at this distance, just know that it's going to be a little bit softer than if you didn't. However, it's still a fairly usable image. Taking a look at the exit pupil, eyebox, and image stability. Focusing out on the horizon, that farthest tower is a little bit over 2,000 yards away. I set my side parallax to be as close to infinity as possible. The mirage is making the image look a lot less sharp and clear than it could have been. But again, that's just one of the things that you have to worry about when you're shooting at longer distances, especially when you have a hot sun and cold air. Things just get freaky. At 15x, shifting the camera side to side, both the reticle and the targets downrange maintain a very high level of sharpness to one another. The shadows come in progressively, meaning that it'll slowly get darker and darker and darker until you can't look through it anymore. This is a very good performance. It doesn't seem all that tight, and let me tell you, when you get behind this thing, with how forgiving this is, it really does make for a good experience. Lowering it down to roughly 10x, again, we have the same sort of performance. Backing it down to 6x, you're going to again have a step up in performance, but it's still going to perform roughly the same as far as everything maintaining a high level of sharpness to one another. Bringing it back to its minimum at 2.5x, and this thing is actually very large to get behind. It's surprising, actually, considering just how big the scope is, and the magnification range is technically a 7x multiplier. I wasn't expecting it to be as forgiving as it is, but boy howdy, was I wrong. To make that live for you a little bit more dynamically before we get into our side-by-side comparisons, 2.5x on this thing is awesome. Very large, very easy to get behind, and paired with that reticle, it really does make for a very fast to deploy and get on target setup. Really, really nice. I cannot fault this thing at all in this regard, and I'm very pleased to say that, because nothing pleases me more when a scope seems like it's set up pretty good in this aspect. At 10x, you could see the exact same level of performance, albeit with a slightly tighter eyebox. Again, the higher up in the magnification you go, the tighter it's going to get across every scope that we'll ever test. Just like we saw on the long-distance power towers, sharpness of both the reticle and the targets here at 81 yards are impressive. At 15x, clearly it's going to get a little bit tighter to get behind, and given the slightly failing light, it might add to that a little bit. But overall, this is a very good performance. Very usable eyebox on this thing, and the exit pupil being 11.4 to 2.9 minimum to maximum. We'll compare that to some other scopes momentarily, but just appreciate what you're looking at right now. It's a very excellent performance. So when I got my hands on the Maven RS1.2, 2.5 to 15 by 44 in the first focal plane, I wanted to get something else to compare it directly against, and that is definitely a job for the Tract Toric of the exact same magnification range. Both of these scopes are made in Japan. Both of them are from companies that are direct to the consumer. There's no middleman. I haven't had the best experience with Tract optics in the past. I always felt that they were a little bit on the disappointing and flat side. But comparing these two, whether side by side looking through them here or on paper, there's a lot of similarities. For example, not only are they the same magnification and front objective size, they're both first focal planes, albeit you can get both of these in second focal plane options with some minor setting differences here and there. They're the exact same length at 14 inches. They're almost the same weight, but that's because the Toric has a much larger turret setup. They're the exact same field of view, 41.7 to 7 feet minimum to maximum, and the exact same exit pupil, 11.4 to 2.9, and the exact same eye relief at 3.9 inches. The only real difference between these two is, well, the Toric is $200 less expensive at around $1,000 if you opt for the illuminated version. This is the non-illuminated version. I bought it secondhand off of a guy, and I was so excited by the price that he gave it for me, plus he was a fan of my channel, that I didn't even think about asking or confirming that it had illumination. So shame on me. Lesson learned. Definitely cross all your T's and dot all your I's. But nevertheless, for the price that I paid, it was like around $800 with a set of MDT precision rings. I was quite pleased considering that this scope was practically brand new. The images on these are quite similar to one another. They were both filmed on the same day, but the Maven was filmed in a clearer sky environment. When I filmed the Toric, we had some clouds coming in, which is why the lighting looks so different. Views through them are almost identical. Scope body profiles are almost identical. As far as tracking performance and everything, they're both identical. Identical? Identical. But the Toric has a much nicer, cohesive package and setup to it. I prefer all of the controls on the Toric as opposed to the RS, and you're going to see that in the Toric review, which is going to be coming out probably directly after this video, because I couldn't put it down. I really had a hard time saying, I'm not going to review this Toric today, or even just pick it up, hold it, and use it. It takes something quite special for me to feel that way, and the Tract Toric 2.5 to 15 certainly makes me feel that way. All of the nuances and complaints that I have about the Maven are basically all taken care of with the Tract. With the exception of the illumination knob, they're about the same from my previous experience with Tract Torics, so not a giant issue or problem, but at least the Toric has an excellent locking elevation turret, albeit one that is slightly easy to get in and out of the lock, but it's there, and the turrets feel and sound much better. Another thing with the Toric is they're a lot less money. Whether you're getting it illuminated or non-illuminated, it's going to change a little bit, but you're going to be saving around $200 going with the Tract. And I know that they offer first responder discounts. I do not know about Maven. I should have checked that. My apologies. But nevertheless, this Tract Toric is the best Tract I've gotten my hands on so far, and it's something I do not want to put down anytime soon. Whereas the Maven is in need of some tweaking. Next up is going to be another option in the same magnification range, but in the second focal plane. The Night Pearl Manul 2.5 to 15 by 50 in the second focal plane comes in about $450 less expensive than the Maven. However, they're the exact same length. They are the exact same weight. Their fields of view are both very similar, but the Maven does take it by ever so slightly. We have 40.4 to 6.8 with the Night Pearl, and the Maven's a little bit more than that. As far as the exit pupil, it actually goes to the Night Pearl because it has a little bit larger exit pupil at the maximum magnification being 3.3 millimeters. Both of them share the same 3.9 inches of eye relief. The reason why I'm rolling in the Night Pearl is because you might not feel the need to have a first focal plane scope in this magnification range, but you're still looking for a simple reticle, you're still looking for illumination, and you're looking for something that's going to be a little bit simpler to use. Given the fact that this Manul M6 is in the second focal plane and has capped elevation and windage turrets, you're basically going to set your combat 0 and just hold for any sort of distance. It's a much rawer and simpler setup overall, and it's also a lot less expensive. And optically, I think it's really close to the Maven, if not slightly better in some areas. However, the Night Pearl definitely has much more chromatic aberration, which you can very clearly tell at the 6 o'clock position there. I don't know what's going on with this video. It must have encoded weird. I've been having problems with my computer, so I'm hoping that the rest of this comparison segment is not going to be just like fading to black momentarily. And if it does, I'm really sorry, folks. I've just got way too much stuff on this computer. Hopefully I'll be able to address that soon. With the personal problems out of the way, at 200 yards, both of these are looking quite good. The image with the Night Pearl is a little bit washed out by comparison to the Maven, but overall, both of these, I would say, are comparable to one another. It all really depends on what your end game is. Do you value first focal plane versus second focal plane? Do you value having the ability to dial for elevation for dope with a turret or using a reticle? You can't do either with the Night Pearl, but if you're looking for a simpler, rawer setup, something like the Night Pearl might work out better for most people if you're going to be focusing on a hunting sort of role. But if you feel like you might take this into a semi-hunting, semi-tactical role and have it be a good in-between optic for one particular rifle, let's say you only have one gun to do all of your shooting with, well, there are some other options that we're going to take a look at right now. And the first one's going to be with the Meopta Optica 6 3-18 by 50 in the first focal plane featuring the MRAD1 reticle. If you're fans of my channel, I've talked about the scope probably more than any other scope I've ever reviewed. I bought this scope used on a whim, not knowing how I would like it, and it has quickly become one of my favorite MPVOs of all time. And it's very upsetting to say, but I don't think Meopta is doing great. And I really hope that these scopes could be more readily available. We'll touch on that momentarily. As far as the price point, when you could find the Optica 6s available, they're around $800. So a pretty good price savings over the Maven. However, I do believe that the Meoptas are not entirely made in one country. I think that the glass might be European, the bodies might be Chinese, and they might have finished assembly somewhere else. I've never gotten a straight answer from anybody on them, so I apologize for not knowing any more information on that. As far as the length, the Optica 6 is going to be about a ½ inch longer. It's going to weigh a couple ounces heavier, but it has a lot more features going on for it. As far as our overall field of view, given the fact that it's a 3-18, it's of course going to be less, but it seems very relative to what we see with the Maven. As far as our exit pupil, it's actually not bad with the Optica. 9.5 on the minimum. Again, that ½ X difference does play a big role, but they're almost the same at the maximum 2.8 to 2.9 millimeter, even though the Optica has 3x more up top. Eye relief is also the same at 3.9 inches. Both of these scopes are quite similar, but both of them are quite different. The Optica definitely seems like it's much more towards the tactical side of things, but it could absolutely be used in a hunting role. 2.5 to 3x on the minimum is not that different overall, and the MRAD1 reticle is almost as easy to pick up on dead center as what we see with the milling reticle or even the MOA reticles found in the Maven. So it really is a matter of personal preference. If you really want to save ounces, then maybe go towards a loopholed option, which will probably save you even more weight and probably have less features, but those would be American made in most cases, and they would have a pretty good track record with most of their lineup. As good as the Maven is optically, I do have to give it to the Meopta. It just has the edge on sharpness, clarity, and color representation. It just seems like a slightly more cohesive package and has a lot more depth to the image. Whether you're at the maximum of 18x or if you dial it back to 15x to rival that with what we see with the Maven, the Optica is still just a better overall setup. And the farther out you go, the more you're going to realize that. I love the Meopta Optica 6. I think it's still one of the best optics ever made. Unfortunately, Meopta hasn't been all that capable of bringing scopes into the US, whether that's by choice or by unfortunate circumstances. And I really hope that that changes soon, because I want everyone to own a Meopta Optica 6 3-18 by 50 in the first focal plane with the MRAD1 reticle. Given the fact that there is a substantial weight difference between these two, about 4 ounces, I would absolutely hands down go with the Meopta over the Maven, but I'd go with the Meopta over a lot of different scopes of these similar magnification ranges. It really is that good if you could find one. And for the final comparison of the video, it's a scope that we've already taken a real quick look at, the Vector Continental 2-12 by 44 in the first focal plane. This scope came out at around $600, but on their global site, they went up to like $700 or $800, which I don't know why. Maybe it's because on the global site, it's not on the standard USA or Euro site. I'm hoping that's going to change very soon. But nevertheless, it's still a substantial price savings over the Maven. As far as the length goes, the Conti is 1.6 inches shorter, and it weighs about the same, 27 ounces on my scale. Field of view is going to go to the Continental, again, because it's 2-12, not a 2.5 to 15. So we have 54 to 10.8 feet. I didn't get the chance to find and exit people nor measure it with the Vector Continental, but I reckon, in fact, I guarantee you, it's better than what you find in the Maven. Eye relief on both of these is 3.9 inches. If you're curious how well the Continental reticle is going to be for hunting, we already took a look at that in the heavy snow of my backyard. But because the illumination on it is so good, let's say you're in a darker environment, the illumination is going to help make up the difference with what you're not seeing when you're not illuminated all the way or magnified all the way into the reticle. It's definitely on the finer side, especially compared to the Maven, but the illumination does close that gap quite a good bit. However, when you do bring it towards their maximum, boy howdy, does that reticle on the Continental just come to life. I think it's one of the better SPR-style reticles out there on the market. I think Vector really hit the nail on the head with this one. They are coming out with a slightly tuned version of it that's going to have a big ring similar to what EOTech runs on their Voodoo series optics. I don't know how I'm going to feel about that. I really think that the post at 3, 6, and 9 on this really keep a good traditional look and keep the practicality much higher, to keep the usability at a much higher level. But I'm sure that there's going to be a market for it, or else, why would a company build something that no one's going to use? I guess time will tell. Despite the fact that there is a 3x difference on these two scopes, the view through the Continental is significantly larger than with the Maven, so it actually plays with your eye a little bit, thinking that you have less magnification with the Continental, but you actually have just a vastly larger view looking through it. It makes for a much better overall usable experience. Yes, you're not going to be as magnified to a target. That's just simple math and physics. You can't really do much about it. But the experience behind the Continental is one of just joy and wonderment. The Continental is also a much more cohesive seeming package. All of the controls are flawless in my opinion. And optically, I actually have to give it to the Vector. It does use shot glass, but it is made in China, but it's still shot glass. It's still to the same specifications as you'd find it in another country where it was produced. The Vector Continental is the clear winner for me here. I love everything about it, especially the fact that it's coming in at a much lower price point, typically about half the price. I really do think that the choice is clear between these two. I don't know what some people are going to say about this review. I don't know what some people are going to say about this optic in question, because a lot of people had speculated that on paper it could be one of the best IPVO optics on the market, and I thought so too, which is why I was really excited to get my hands on one. And I was even happier when Maven was more than happy to oblige my request for sending one in for me to test and review, and I'm very thankful. So Maven, thank you so much for making this video possible. I couldn't have done without you, and I've been completely transparent with that since the beginning. However, I do feel that this optic is slightly half-baked. For $1,200, I was expecting a slightly better experience, at least a little bit more cohesive package. There's a lot of really good things happening in this scope. The overall construction is good. The fact that it's Japanese made is good. The price point is pretty good, but as we've already talked about with the Tract Toric, it's still 20% more expensive than that optic, and the Toric has more features than what the Maven does. And that's absolutely something that needs to be taken into consideration. In fact, I might be doing a standalone video between that scope and this scope head to head to really figure out, like, could you have a better optic than how the Toric performs? Because that thing is, when I say it's breathtaking, holy cow, I don't want to put it down. I really, really don't. Anyway, what I would like to see changed with this optic are only really a few things. Make the touch points all the same. So use that wonderful aggressive knurling on all the touch points. That would help. I'd even go as far as making the illumination knob and the parallax knob a little bit larger in diameter, so it's a little bit less sensitive to those minor little imperfections when you're trying to really dial to get the image perfect. I did have a hard time with several different targets at several different distances, albeit inside 500 or 600 yards. Beyond that, you set it and you basically forget it. Optically, I think this thing is very good. I also really like the reticle options. I think they're a really good combination of simple yet packed with information without being overly packed. It's a great balance. The illumination, I feel, could absolutely be improved. It doesn't necessarily need to be much brighter, only because how well the reticle is scaled, that you could actually use it in most magnifications, in most environments without it. But I would really like the illumination to be captured better. I think the bleed out is noticeable and apparent, and someone's going to pick it up. And it's not when you're only using the brightest setting. I lowered it down a couple of notches, and it still had that bleed out, which is something I'm not a big fan of. And I would have to say that the cardinal sin for this thing is just the turret, the elevation turret, I should say. I would understand if it was really hard and very tactile to turn, where you actually have to put conscious effort into it to really make an adjustment. The zero stop on it is very good. I like it. It seems very robust, and because it's hard pins on hard pins for the lockup, you shouldn't have to worry about damaging anything. But the elevation turret's just so easy to turn. It's so light, and the clicks don't really seem like they're locking in there. There's a little bit too much play in it, and that's something I'd expect from like a cheaper locking turret. But that's not what you get from most cheaper locking turrets. The locking turrets on the Continental or even the Athlon Helios BTR Gen 2s are vastly superior to the turrets on this scope. Now there is another option. You can buy this optic as the RS1, which has a capped elevation turret, but it doesn't seem like it's offered with illumination. So if you like what this scope has to offer, but you want it capped turrets and no illumination, you can buy that and save about $200 or so. But again, it's still the exact same price as with the Tract. And on top of it, you're only offered the MOA reticles. You're not offered a milling reticle with the first focal plane capped version. I really don't get it. However, despite the fact that it doesn't have illumination, I'd probably go for the capped turret version of the scope more, specifically because not only does the turret not impress me at all, but when we dialed up for 10 mils of elevation at 1,000 yards earlier, the image did look a little bit softer. So if you're only using the reticle to hold, 5 mils might get you to where you need to go, but it also might not. So you're really going to have to figure out what setup you're going to be running and stick with it. I think there's massive potential here, and I really hope that Maven comes out with a 1.3 version of this that fixes a couple of those issues that I talked about. If they can do that, I think they'd absolutely have a winner on their hands. So hopefully, fingers crossed, Maven's going to listen to this video and start incorporating some of those design features into their next generation scopes, but I'll only be able to hold my breath so much. With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for watching. As always, I'll see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.